Hello everyone and welcome back to FMR Station House. Now, it's been half term, so I haven't really had a lot of time to build this coal mine. So what I thought I'd do is show you guys how I make my awesome looking trees and my ground coverage for a lot of my scenery area, especially where it's green or forestry. So let's get on to how we make these cool trees. So, how I make my pine trees, I use this asparagus fern plant that I bought from the local garden centre, and what I do is I chop down the amount of ferns that I'm going to want to use for the branches of each tree. I usually build round about 5 to 8 trees at a time, so cut myself enough branches to do that. Now, these plants I get from your local garden centre, and they're about $5.99 a plant, and they last quite a while if you keep watering them. Sometimes I do forget to do that part. So now what I do here is I place them into a water-sealed tub and get myself some glycerin. Now, this is a formula that will help preserve and make these fern branches last a long time on your layout. So it's a 1 part glycerin and 3 part warm water. Now I get as much glycerin out as I can, so I put a bit of water into the pot and shake it out. Then give it a really good stir and then add it into the ferns. Now this takes around 3 to 4 days for the ferns to soak in, so it's best to do this before you even plan doing your trees. Also, if you can make it airtight as such, it helps the process. Now, I usually put a food bag over it and help sink the ferns into the water and glycerin, and then I add this onto the shelf and leave it for about 4 days. Now, while we wait for the glycerin to soak into the fern branches, I make my tree trunks. Now, what I use is balsa wood. The squared stuff. It comes to about 1 metre long and it's only 35p each piece. So I get myself usually about 10 of these at a time and leave them on the shelf until I need them. The reason I use the balsa wood is that it's a soft wood and it's easy to turn into a tree trunk by scraping down the side of it with the craft knife, as I am doing here. Always scrape away from yourself though, because you wouldn't want to really stab yourself with these craft knives. They're quite sharp. So I'll do this to all of them. As you can see here, pretty much just put your knife down flat and scrape along. Don't cut it, just scrape. Now, another reason why I use the balsa wood is that it is soft, as I mentioned, and it's easy to stab things into it, which is what we'll come on to in just a moment. But I paint every single bit brown, dark brown I go for. That's no particular brown, it's down to personal choice. I like a darker trunk, so I use a darker brown. And then what I do at this stage is I get the tip of my craft knife and just carve away bits. It's going to be the bottom of the trunk. Now this is in N-gauge, so the detail isn't so amazing, but I still like to put as much detail as I possibly can into each project that I do. So this does give a little bit of detail, as you can see here, as if it's a a tree trunk. The next stage, we start working on the branches. I use beading wire for this. It's a 34 gauge beading wire that I pick up from a craft store. So I cut it into various lengths using a pair of scissors and then stab it into a piece of polystyrene. Now, each tree usually has about 30 of these branches, so it is a bit of a long-winded process, but it is so worth it at the end of the day. Now that I've waited the 4 days of the glycerin soaking into the fern branches, I take them out, dry them off on a bit of paper, and then I cut down to the size I actually want for my N-gauge trees. Now, these are quite small and can be fiddly, and obviously a lot easier when working with double O gauge or O gauge. I'll bring out the Rocket Max glue. This is ideal for this because it's tacky to start off with, and it allows the branches, the fern branches, to stick to the wire quite easily, although this can be fiddly at times. So just take your time and be patient with it. And as you can see here, the rocket glue applied to the beading wire, and then just pretty much just placing the fern onto it, the tackiness holds it enough for it to then set and dry. Now, once I spend about 5 minutes doing about 30 of these, I then get my tree trunk and some track pins. Now, I stab the track pins at 3 on each level, representing branches. And then I remove one track pin, go a little bit higher up the branch and stab it in. And then get myself my first fern branch, dab it into a bit of rocket glue just at the end, and then place it into the hole that I've previously made with the track pin. And I'll do this on a repetitive basis until I've gone all the way from the bottom to the top of the tree. As you can see here, with all the branches on, the tree's already starting to come together. At this part of the process, we get ourselves some Pico 2mm static grass. I also use some cheap ultra strong or extra strong hairspray, and then I spray the whole tree, give it a good dousing, get the 2mm Pico static grass and just sprinkle it all over the tree. So yeah, I do this twice. I put an extra layer of hairspray on and put a second coating of the 2mm grass. Now, depending how dense you want these trees, you can do 2 to 4 layers, but personally I think 2 layers is just enough. And at this stage I head out to a well ventilated area, my back garden, and spray the tree with a green spray paint all over, not too much. Now, the green spray paint I've got here is quite bright, so I'm not too brilliant with it, but the fact this tin only cost me £2 in a reduced aisle, I'm not going to complain. So what I did do, I picked up the brown as well. Now this is a nice brown, and I spray all underneath the whole of the tree, because underneath pine trees they're quite brown because it's where the sun doesn't get to them. And I'll just give a light dosing of brown over the top of the green, and it brings the green down quite a bit. Then I hang it up into my area and just leave them to dry overnight, and then place them on the shelf until I'm ready for them for the scene I am making. Now that the trees are up drying, I'm going to start on the ground coverage. Now, I get loads of soil from the forest. It's free, so I'm going to dig it up and I'll pour it onto an old baking tray. And yeah, just get out any of the bigger bits, like these bits of stones and bits and bobs, because I'm not going to have any use of those. And then I take the tray to the oven and pop it on about 200 degrees for about 2 hours. And that will dry it all out and kill any bacteria. Now, I run it through the blender. You don't want to put your face too close here because it does puff up with lots of dust, so be careful when taking it back out of the blender. As you can see there, we're now going to separate 2 different sizes. I'm going to go for a fine ballast, well, fine dirt, shall I say, and more of a rock falling kind of dirt. So this is where I do that, and I'll just run it through a plastic 99p sieve. Now what we're going to do is the leaves that I've collected up, I also pop them into the blender and I grind these down to a smaller consistency, and it just gives an extra bit of colour, I think, for the ground coverage. So into the blender, giving it a good old blend round until it breaks down to smaller parts. Once again, take it out of the blender. Be careful, because again this also the dirt and that lot can puff up out of the blender, so you don't want to be sniffing it. Pop it into a container so I can use for the ground coverage. Now we move on to the ground coverage. I first of all put a covering of fine dirt all over the ground space. Then I ballast the track. Now I'm using the Woodland Scenic Fine Ballast buff for this scenery. I do have several different colours, but most of the time in Engage I stick with fine. I think the others get a bit too big. So yeah, there's so many ways that you can ballast track. I'm not going to go through it here. I have done a video before by using Ballast Magic, so if you want to check that out, you'll find it in the description below. Alright, now that the ballast is down and the fine dirt's been sprinkled all over the area, I cover over the top of the dirt with some Mod Podge. You can use pretty much PVA glue, but I've got some Mod Podge laying around, so I'm going to use this. Now that I've covered the area with Mod Podge, I add peat. Now, we buy bags of peat in because we have 2 giant African snails as pets. The kids will love them. That's right, yes, we have giant African snails as pets. But the peat is fantastic consistency. It's got twiggy bits, it looks like bark broken up. It looks like what you'll find underneath trees in the forest, so this is ideal for this stage. Now, if you remember those leaves I put through the blender, well, this is now where they come into play. I add a handful of them into the sieve again, and I give it a push round so all of the smaller and finer parts of the leaves come out. You don't get too much, but enough just to add a little bit of extra colour and texture into the ground coverage itself, and I think this just gives it a little bit of a kick. Now I move on to the next stage, and I use the Pico Static Grass Applicator. Now I brought mine between 30 to 40 pounds. They're an ideal investment because you'll do a lot of scenery coverage. I also use the Pico 2mm static grass. Now I put in 2 blends of colour, which is Apache grass colour and the autumn grass. That gives it a bit of variety throughout looking at the scene itself, so it's not just one pure green. I add on the Mod Podge in patches, and then I get the applicator that's got the static grass in and give it a good old shake over the whole area. And this does a really nice job for me. So what we're doing now is moving back onto the dirt that I got from the forest and put through the blender. Now these are the more of the larger clumps that I was on about, and I'll put them around the bottom of cliffs, rocks, anywhere that I would suspect that the cliff's fallen or the rocks have fallen, and they cause really, really nice debris. So I'll sprinkle it over some Mod Podge and leave that to set. It's now time to place them awesome trees that we made at the beginning of the video, and this is where it's all going to come to life. So all I really do is I stab in a barbecue skewer into the foam, and that has made the hole for where I'm going to put the tree. Put a little bit of Mod Podge on the bottom of the tree and then place it where I've just taken the barbecue skewer from. I will then just tether out and straighten up some of the leaves, because when you handle these sometimes the little wires just bend back inwards, so you don't want that, you just want to tidy them up a bit. And I'll repeat the process until I've got the amount of trees I want in the area here. So that's how I make them. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did, please hit that subscribe button and the little bell to notify you when our next videos come up. Now we hope that you guys have picked up a couple of tips or tricks maybe, and use this in your future builds, because it's a fantastic way to get some really realistic and cool looking trees for your scenery. Also guys, don't forget, drop in loads of comments down below. What do you think of them? Have you got tips of your own that you can give to us? Because we always say we're no experts, we're also in this hobby for fun.